Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get-started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me directly at Opperman Investigations. Now, our guest today, this is a historic interview. Our guest today is William Hamilton, and he is the creator of the Inslaw.com, the Promis software. You may have heard the story. We've done some shows about this in the past with Ted Rubenstein, just trying to explain this complicated story that at one point was described as the octopus by journalist Danny Casolaro, who met an untimely demise. But this is the first interview with William Hamilton, the man at the center of this story. Mr. William Hamilton, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Now, I know we've already been talking for about 20 minutes, so I know there's going to be some great content here. Before we get into the whole Inslaw, Promis, octopus, this whole crazy story that you've lived your life firsthand, tell us about yourself. Who is William Hamilton?
I'm the third oldest of 12 children. My wife and I have 6 adult children now, of course, and 17 grandchildren. I graduated from the University of Notre Dame as an English literature major and went to work for NSA, where I worked for 7 years. And then I went to work for a public accounting firm in their management consulting department and answered a request for proposals to develop a case management software system for the local prosecutor's office in D.C., which I named. And it was well thought of, and it was soon used in many state and local prosecutors' offices across the country.
Yeah, your audio dropped there for a second. You named it Inslaw?
The company, yeah.
Oh, you're right. And the software was named Inslaw or Promis?
No, Promis.
Promis, okay, yeah. Your audio dropped there for a second. Okay. So then you received you answered a request for a bid to design this software.
That's right. And then I named it Promis, yeah.
Gotcha. Now, I was wondering this. Now, at the time, because clearly now, you're a savvy guy, you're in touch with all these people, Elliot Richardson, and he was your attorney. But at the time, how did you get that contract? Did you hire lobbyists, or you just off the shelf?
No,
really,
just off the shelf. I was interested in the courts. I thought about going to law school, and so it was something I had a pre-existing interest in. Not Promis, and not case management, but courts. The legal system,
right.
And so I just wrote the proposal, and the request for proposal came from the D.C. government because the local D.C. does not have home rule, and the local prosecutor is a division of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so the D.C. government's Office of Crime Analysis issued the request for proposals. I wrote the proposal. It was a competitive procurement, and we won it.
And it was like a $10 million contract, right?
No, not that.
No.
That was much smaller.
Okay.
And after it was finished, I went to work for the U.S. Attorney's Office as an independent contractor to try to improve the software, because it was the first time anybody had done something like this. And so there were a lot of opportunities to make it better. you know.
Okay. And how old were you at that time?
Well, I had worked already 7 years after graduating from college. I guess you graduated from college around early 20s, right?
Right. About 30 years old is what I was figuring, yeah.
Yeah, probably. That sounds right.
Okay, so you're working for the U.S. Attorney's Office as a contractor.
Right.
And you designed the software. And I guess that's where the issues came in with the litigation, right, that they claim that they owned it.
Oh, no, I think that was all baloney.
Okay.
The most telling thing is that one of the lawyers who represented Inslaw, Roderick Hills, we had retained because he was a very prominent business lawyer, and we needed to get the Justice Department to agree that when the Justice Department liquidated under the Carter administration,
yeah,
the one that had been financing the development of Promis was called the U.S. Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. When the Carter administration decided to liquidate that agency, we retained Roderick Hills to figure out what do we do, because you have to continue to invest money in software or it loses its value over time, you know.
Sure.
And the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration was disappearing. So where was the money going to come from for the inevitable upkeep and upgrade, you know? And so Roderick Hills went to the Justice Department and asked the Deputy Attorney General, Stan Morris, for a letter confirming that the Justice Department would not object to Inslaw creating a for-profit proprietary derivative of the software containing privately financed enhancements and licensing it to users for a fee across the country. And the Justice Department took 5 months thinking about it. So Rod Hill said, you can't let them hold hostage the future of your company. And so he said, I think whether they like it or not, the copyright law gives Inslaw exclusive, as the author of every version of Promis, the exclusive rights, copyright rights to the software.
Gotcha.
And I think I should have our copyright lawyers at Latham, Watkinson Hills do a legal opinion on that subject. And he did that, and they confirmed that was true. And then Rod Hills said, I think I should have our copyright lawyers deliver a copy of this legal opinion to the top copyright lawyer at the Justice Department so that everybody understands the law. He was a very smart lawyer, you know. And so he did it. The top copyright lawyer's name was Vito Di Pietro in the civil division of the Justice Department. And he, not surprisingly, agreed. It is the law, you know. But most lawyers, in fact, wouldn't know something that technical, you know.
Sure.
And the amendments to the U.S. copyright law spelled all of this out years ago. But most people, as I'm saying, would never had an occasion to learn any of that stuff, even lawyers.
And I guess when you're going up against the federal government, even if you have the law on your side, if they want something, it's an uphill battle.
Right. Yeah, and particularly to give you a clue, Ed, under the Brooks Act, which was named after Congressman Jack Brooks, the any agency of the executive branch of the federal government that ever wanted to buy a piece of software had to apply in advance to the General Services Administration, GSA, and get what's called a delegation of procurement authority to do so, because the GSA had exclusive authority over the federal government's purchase of computer software for years. And at one point, the General Accounting Office did a report criticizing GSA and criticizing the Office of Management and Budget under the Carter administration for failing to provide leadership to federal agencies to stop reinventing the software wheel and start purchasing prepackaged application software products. Because every time if it's a common function of the government like case management or personnel, it's kind of silly to commission someone to develop the software from scratch each time. It's very expensive to do that and error prone.
And it also seems too that they're the crappiest softwares out there. Like with the whole thing with the the healthcare.gov, when it first came out, it was Obama's former buddy, his college roommate or something. It's always like a deal like that, which is how I wondered how you got this deal. It seems like Roderick Hills, he was plugged in to get this kind of deal pushed through. Yeah.
Well, he was a very smart lawyer. Yeah. Like Elliot Richardson was.
Elliot Richardson, by the way, if the audience doesn't know, that's the Saturday Night Massacre from Watergate. This Elliot Richardson who designed. That's right. Yeah. Under protest, resigned.
Yeah, he had a lot of integrity and very bright. Just like we were blessed to have several extremely bright lawyers with integrity. Kind of an unusual combination.
Especially in D.C., with this bunch. Okay.
Yeah.
So then take us through this. Now, you're going back and forth with the government about do you own it, don't you own it, do you have the copyright on it, are you allowed to sell it? What happens next?
Oh, what we didn't really have to go back and forth. Because he got a letter from the Deputy Attorney General's office confirming that they don't object to what we're planning to do.
Okay.
And that was after the internal legal opinion I told you about from Broad Hill's law firm, and after they had given a copy of that internal legal opinion to Vito DiPietro, and after, unbeknownst to us, Vito DiPietro had confirmed it in an internal legal opinion to the top internal contracts lawyer at the Justice Department, where he explained what the law is, the copyright law, and how it affects Inslaw's copyright rights, and that Inslaw had exclusive copyrights under the copyright law as the author of every version of Promis, just what Hills had said, and that the government's rights were limited to whatever data rights they had negotiated in the individual contracts with Inslaw. And they never negotiated any, so they had no rights. They never sought to negotiate any, But it was an invaluable thing to have this Vito DiPietro, who I had never heard of, issue a internal legal opinion. We didn't even know he did it. And we found out about it in litigation discovery in the bankruptcy court. And Justice tried to keep that copy of that legal opinion from us because it's pretty dispositive, And the court, we did a motion to compel production to the bankruptcy judge, and he granted production. And that's how we know about it.
How did it wind up in bankruptcy? How did you wind up in bankruptcy court?
because the government withheld millions of dollars under that $10 million contract to put Promis in major cities of the U.S. attorney's offices in big cities across the country. And they withheld on purpose millions of dollars in order to force us into Chapter 11. And then we assume they were going to force us into liquidation. There could be an auction of the software, and it could be purchased by friends of the administration in power.
Wow.
Because it could be make a fortune, you know?
Gotcha.
And, the thing I've started to tell you, but I got distracted from it, is that when GAO criticized, I told you they had issued a report criticizing the lack of leadership from GSA and OMB on this subject, particularly on case management software. Meaning the leadership don't reinvent the wheel each time, buy prepackaged application software products. GSA's number 2 guy, the Reagan presidential appointee at the GSA, who was number 2, this was like in '82 or something like that, early in the Reagan administration. He wrote to the way that works, you probably know, when GSA does a report, they send a draft of it to any agency that they're criticizing, like GSA and OMB, and give them a chance to defend themselves, you know. And then they publish in the GAO report whatever these agencies write to them, you know. And so the number 2 guy at GSA said, we agree with the recommendation of GAO, but with an important provision. The software has to be engineered right from the beginning for ease of customization, or the whole thing won't work. They said, just like Inslaw did with the Promis software. That software is capable of being used to track anything that's needed to be tracked in the federal government. So this is the presidential appointee who's number 2 at GSA somehow knows all this stuff, which tells you something, right? How does he know all of that? It's all true. But he knows it because he's seeing all of these illicit uses, copyright infringing uses of our software being approved by his agency, GSA, through delegations of procurement authority.
So basically they were using the Inslaw software in other departments and other agencies other than it was designed for and licensed, I guess, by you.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And at one point, Elliot Richardson one day introduced my wife and me to someone who was knowledgeable about software being used for intelligence applications.
And around what time was that? What year was that about?
I'd have to try and figure that out.
How old were you then, around that time when you got that invitation? Because you were 30 when you designed the software. How old were you around that time when Richardson introduced you to this intelligence information?
Probably in my 30s somewhere.
Okay,
you know?
So not too many years down the road. Gotcha.
No, and I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, no, the Richardson, he informed you that the software was being used for intelligence gathering.
And he said, this is before I knew anything about what they were up to, you know. And he said, Lockheed Aircraft Inslaw a lot of money. And I thought to myself, what? What the hell were they using the Lockheed Aircraft for? And over time, I found out that Lockheed Aircraft had a contract to develop the F-117 stealth fighter. And the contract was jointly funded by the CIA and the Air Force. And the Lockheed Aircraft vice president in charge of the development of the F-117 stealth fighter later co-authored a book about the great success of the development of that F-117 stealth fighter, and particularly remarkable database software for the cockpit, which the author's name is Ben Rich, and the book is called Skunk Works.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with that book, Ben Rich, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he goes into some detail. He claims that a couple of his engineers at the Skunk Works in Burbank, California, came to him one day and said, "We got an idea. Why don't we develop some sophisticated," he may not use that word sophisticated, but it is very sophisticated, database software for the cockpit that will guide the airplane automatically to minimize its exposure to ground fire and missiles and stuff like that, and get it to where it's supposed to go automatically. And it went into great detail about it. Ben Rich did in the book. And he said it was so successful that the Air Force Systems Command in Dayton, Ohio, later bought a global license from Lockheed Aircraft to put it in the cockpit of every U.S. attack aircraft. That's a lot of money, probably, right?
Yeah, this is based on your software. And Elliot Richardson, I guess he knew this information because he was defense secretary at one point.
He was, yeah. I mean, I don't think he knew it as defense secretary, but he, of course, was a very bright guy. And
right.
A lot of people respected him like we did.
Did you have a relationship with him before you retained him to represent you?
No, what happened was Rod Hills introduced me to
Gotcha.
him. And Hills said that we have to get an independent decision by the board of the not-for-profit that it has fulfilled its useful life, and it needs to give a for-profit successor company. This is because of the demise of that agency that financed everything, the liquidation of it by the Carter administration.
Right.
And so he said, you can't make that decision. You have to get independent directors. And so Hills got Elliot Richardson and the guy who had been White House counsel under Lyndon Johnson. I can't think of his name right now. A famous lawyer, another one, and Cal Collier to agree to comprise the board of the not-for-profit and make the decision, which they did. It wasn't a difficult decision. Without LEA, you got to do something, because otherwise the software will die if you don't find a way to pay for the inevitable upkeep and upgrade of the software.
Now, how are you funding all this? How are you funding these legal fees? So were they taking a percentage of the future contingency, or how are you funding all this?
No, we just paid for them under our operating budget of the company. Okay. And none of them overcharged us at all. Right. They were all quite decent people. Elliot Richardson, of course, and Rod Hills. We're very lucky to have such good people, who were not corruptible.
Gotcha. So when did you first get wind that they had this backdoor in there and it was being used for intelligence? Is that the next big point of the story?
I don't remember anymore, Ed. There's so much that's gone on in this thing, so I can't at the moment. I can't think of when that would have happened, and so I'm not being difficult with you. I just don't remember.
Well, would you feel better if we took like a half-hour break or something like that, or is there something else? Okay,
then. I may not come up with it for days.
Gotcha. Well, I'll come back in days. Trust me. I want to hear this story. Okay, but ultimately, you do start hearing that there was a backdoor and was being used for intelligence purposes.
Well, let me give you an example of how we heard.
Yeah.
That you'll find amusing, I think. At one point, I was contacted by email and telephone by the official publisher of the publisher of an official commemorative book for the 50th anniversary of the U.S. Air Force. And it was 12 months before the 50th anniversary that he contacted me. And he said what the anniversary is about, 50th year of the U.S. Air Force. And he said, by invitation only, we'd like to invite Inslaw to take out a full-page ad in the official publication. And he explained that Inslaw, Microsoft, and Oracle were among the largest software, the U.S. software vendors with the largest installed bases of their products in the U.S. Air Force. Inslaw had never sold it to the Air Force and never authorized anyone else to sell it to the Air Force. But he's telling us Oracle, Microsoft, and Inslaw are the leading software vendors with penetration in the Air Force. Of course, that made no sense, right?
Yeah.
And then after Elliot Richardson passed away, Admiral Murphy said, the first thing you need to do is get another outstanding lawyer like Elliot Richardson, because government officials will regard it as their patriotic duty. This is Admiral Murphy talking. To look Inslaw's lawyer in the eyes and lie. And so he introduced me to Judge William Webster, one of his friends, who had been the head of the FBI and the head of the CIA under the Reagan administration. And 3 days after Admiral Murphy and I had spent hours with Judge Webster, he called his friend, Admiral Murphy, and said, I'm not confident that the George W. Bush administration is going to be willing to settle. And I'd have to be doing it on a contingency fee basis.
Right.
Because Inslaw doesn't have any money. And it wouldn't be fair for me to do that to my partners if I have severe doubts the government's going to be willing to settle, So he declined to do it. And so then Admiral Murphy introduced Nancy, my wife, and me to Boyden Gray, who had been White House counsel. And when Admiral Murphy was chief of staff to Vice President George H.W. Bush in the Reagan administration, he had hired Boyden as the lawyer for Vice President Bush, and then Boyden stayed on as the White House counsel when George H.W. Bush became president. And so Nancy and I met with Murphy and Boyden Gray, and Boyden says to Boyden Gray, someone needs to be the John Adams of the Inslaw case and represent Inslaw simply because it's the right thing to do. Will you do it, Boyden? And Boyden says, can I get paid? And so after the meeting, I said right away, well, we can pay you on a contingency fee basis. And because obviously we couldn't pay him any other way, And so Murphy and Nancy and I had lunch after this meeting with Boyden, and Murphy was laughing. He said, because I was chief of staff to Vice President Bush, I had to review and approve the financial statements of all the people who worked for Bush, including Boyden. And he says he's one of the wealthiest people in the country. Yeah. He's the heir to the R.J. Reynolds tobacco fortune. Yeah. So he was finding it amusing that he was asking, can I get paid?
They even stiff you with the bill for lunch, these guys, too, when you go with these cases
right.
sometimes,
But Boyd did agree to represent us. Of course, he was kind of intimidated probably by Admiral Murphy's having hired him in the first place years earlier, and then Boyden got stonewalled by the government just like Elliot Richardson did. They just lie.
Right, and when we look back in hindsight now,
it's so illegal.
When we look back in hindsight now, we can see these Freedom of Information Act documents, like the one about Bill Weld we were talking about off the air, where they're talking about $500 million in sales through Khashoggi and being laundered, being walked through BCCI, the Bank of International. So there was money out there, man. Where was that money? Did you ever find out who got that money?
Friends of the administration in power.
Right.
There was I may have sent this to you, but at one point, Nancy had an opportunity to meet with Senator Paul Sarbanes of Maryland. Right. I was out in California attending the deposition of a federal judge in our case, Inslaw taking his deposition in his courtroom. A guy who was involved in the misconduct when he was the number 2 guy at the Justice Department, and by then he was a federal district judge in San Francisco, D. Lowell Jensen. And so I was out there and couldn't go to the meeting with Sarbanes, but Nancy had done her homework and had written to Sarbanes and talked about his role in demanding accountability during the Watergate scandal. Apparently he did a lot of good work trying to force an accountability on the Watergate scandal. And so he was a logical person to take interest in Inslaw, And he arranged for the chief investigator for Senator Biden. Biden was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time.
Right.
And he arranged with Ronald Legrand, an African-American lawyer who was the chief investigator under Biden on the Senate Judiciary Committee, to come see Nancy and me and try to help us. Because we're getting stonewalled. Everybody is, And Legrand had a source in the criminal division of the Justice Department. So Legrand came down to see us at the behest of Senator Sarbanes, the senior U.S. Senator in Maryland. And we told him what we think was going on, including illegal sales of our software. And whatever we knew at that time, which would be compared to today elementary, Yeah. And so Legrand says, I've got a trusted source of 20 years who's a senior career official in the criminal division of the Justice Department with a title. And he's asked me to pass on certain information to you and Nancy. He said, what you think happened did happen. You're not crazy. Only you don't know squat about how dirty the Inslaw case really is. And if you ever learn half of it, you'll be sickened. It's a lot dirtier for the Department of Justice than Watergate was, both in its depth and its breadth. The Department of Justice has been compromised at every level on the Inslaw case. And so Elliot Richardson then wrote to Senator Biden, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and explained what his chief investigator had alleged. And he said to him in the letter, we don't know if it's true, obviously, but it's too important not to try to get to the bottom of this. And for that, we need your help to bring your chief investigator and his trusted source from the criminal division in the Justice Department before a duly constituted body to be interrogated under oath. And then in response to that letter he sent to Senator Biden, he gets a letter back from the chief investigator, whom he had not addressed, Ron Legrand. And the letter from Legrand was preposterous, saying something that was not true, that he had told us and Richardson that this information was off the record and it could not be used, which is just total baloney, And so Elliot wrote not to Legrand, but to Biden again.
I have it in front of me. First, he responds back to Legrand responds back, because of his strong belief in the separation of powers doctrine, the chairman has a firm policy that the committee will not intervene in pending litigation. And then a couple of paragraphs down, any committee staff findings or any inferences drawn from the information developed as part of that investigation can only be used as part of the committee's oversight process.
Yeah, and then Richardson pointed out how absurd the whole statement was, but Biden never answered Richardson, and Legrand, that's the name of that African American chief investigator, told Nancy and me at the time, I did not draft that letter and I did not sign it. An aide to Biden drafted the letter and forged my signature.
Legrand said that?
Yeah.
Is he alive today?
Is he alive? Yeah, he's alive.
Yeah.
Whether
wow.
he would confirm that, I have my doubts. It's true. Yeah. What I'm telling you is true. Yeah. But he suffered pretty badly.
Yeah.
He became ostracized over this, and he quickly left the Senate Judiciary Committee staff and got a job in the House of Representatives on somebody's staff. Then he had to leave there right away. They were out to put pain on him,
Yeah.
to shut his mouth, I think, And so whether he would confirm any of that, I have my doubts.
Well, I'm sure he wouldn't. Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's all true. And I think he's as far as I can tell, a decent and honorable guy. But they put pressure on him that beyond what he could take, And he left the government. I'm sure he wanted to continue to work in the government, and he couldn't because of this thing. But it's also revealing about Senator Biden.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he? He's the type of guy who would normally want to salute Elliot Richardson. It's kind of Richardson was good government always, and most people would want to be associated with him for their own self-glory, right? And for Biden to ignore Richardson, it is kind of counterintuitive.
But Mr. Hamilton, let me ask you the question. Now, you've been living this thing a long period of your life. Have you seen any difference between the Democrats and Republicans as far as this deep corruption goes? Especially when the intelligence agencies are involved, it's a whole nother level.
I'm sorry?
Especially when the intelligence agencies are involved.
Right.
It's a whole nother level of corruption.
Yes, I agree with that. And I have no expectation of anything good happening because I think they get by with anything they want to get by with.
Yeah, it's only getting worse.
Classified stuff.
It's only getting worse.
Classified.
Yeah. Now, did you ever receive any kind of justice, any kind of settlement, throw you a bone?
No, not a penny. Not a penny.
Just shut him up. Just shut up William Hamilton. Send him $5 million, $10 million.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, nothing. One of our lawyers who had worked in Central America, I guess, has said the government can pay Inslaw cash.
Yeah.
They can do anything they damn please. And it made no sense. But we had a friend of the family who was a very successful businessman who helped Inslaw financially at one point. And he used to say to me, one thing that doesn't make any sense to me, why don't they just pay Inslaw off?
Right.
And the answer to that, I think, I've told you this, I think, but it came from Admiral Murphy, and when I contacted him after the apparent change of heart on the part of the CIA director George Tenet about settling the CIA part of the Inslaw case, and I asked Admiral Murphy, do you have any insight on why he did such an abrupt change? What happened? And he said, it's my hunch, Bill, I told you this, that there's another use of your software that you don't know about. And it involves something so seriously wrong that money alone cannot cure the problem. And that unless and until Inslaw discovers that additional use of your software, the government may never compensate the company. And he said, I'm confident you're going to figure it out, Bill. And then within 2 weeks, he dropped dead. And he had, of course, he would call me on the telephone, and so I would not be surprised that NSA was monitoring all of those conversations, And he was in a position to be quite lethal, because as chief of staff to Vice President Bush, Bush was in charge of under Reagan, all of the secret stuff.
Right. And
when Bush was the CIA director, his deputy director was Admiral Murphy. So Murphy was a very smart guy, and as you would expect, a 4-star retired admiral, not too much fearful, And I'm sure the people doing all of this misconduct regarded him as a real threat because he knew too much. And at one point, he called me on the phone. This was shortly before he died, and he said, "I'm going to volunteer to serve as Inslaw's intelligence guru and go with Boyd and Gray for his meetings with government officials about settling the Inslaw case, just to keep the government officials honest," which tells you he knows that they know that he's in on it, and that he's in a position to tell them when they're lying,
Sure.
And so if NSA, I don't know that the NSA was monitoring it, except that I know that I was told they were, by the RCMP, they're monitoring our phone calls and telephone and emails, and I have no doubt that would be true. Why wouldn't they do it, right?
No, absolutely. Now, we only have a few minutes left, by the way, in this hour. I've got about 10 minutes left. Let me double check. Now, when he was saying to you that they're using this for something so horrific that you don't even want to know what it is, do you think it was drug trafficking, human trafficking, terrorism?
No, I think I of course could be wrong, Ed, but I can explain to you why I'm pretty confident that it was the main core political blackmail version of Promis.
Gotcha.
Used by the White House, select members of the White House National Security Council for blackmail operations against such targets as members of Congress and their staffs, religious leaders, whatever it takes,
Gotcha.
And you get dirt on them, and then you blackmail them. And that's what I never got a chance to ask Murphy whether I was correct. He was confident I would figure it out. And about 2 weeks before Casolaro was found dead, that Charles Hayes, the guy I told you about, Nancy, Kentucky, hillbilly type guy,
right,
who had worked for Division D as a contractor for years, he called me, and because I had introduced him, meaning Charles Hayes, to Danny Casolaro as a potential source, because he's a former CIA contractor, And Hayes called me and he said, Casolaro is planning to visit a sensitive facility in Washington, D.C., and it'll get him killed. And he's not listening to me. He's being very strong-headed. But if you have any influence with him, you better use it, because he'll get killed. And the facility, Hayes never told me where it was in D.C., I called Danny Casolaro and passed on the warning. And Casolaro said the facility is under the control of George K. Pender. And I already knew from Casolaro that George K. Pender was a former senior CIA clandestine operative who Casolaro believed was the head of what Casolaro called the Octopus, a group of former U.S. and Allied and senior intelligence operatives who primarily for their own personal financial gain undertook sensitive assignments from U.S. intelligence. Sensitive and questionable, you know. And so the facility was headed by the facility unnamed, and then Inslaw's intelligence sources told me the facility was in a 4-story townhouse near the White House on Jackson Place Northwest, where a covert unit from the Defense Intelligence Agency and the U.S. Army Telecommunications Agency facilitated encrypted communications access to the main core database, it being administered at a computer center in Northern Virginia by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, ostensibly for handoff to the DIA and the U.S. Army in the event of a national catastrophe and the imposition of martial law. But in the meantime, being accessed by select members of the White House National Security Council through help from DIA's covert unit at that townhouse, DIA and the Army Telecommunications, who are providing encrypted communications so that select members of the National Security Council staff could interrogate the main core database system to get dirt on people they wanted to get for political blackmail.
You know, it's interesting. This is right around that same period of time with Craig Spence and Henry Vinson and the D.C. call boy blackmail operation there, all that stuff with Lawrence King, that whole bunch, you know. Was doing that homosexual call boy blackmail stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And it's what the whole Jeffrey Epstein stuff is about too.
Right.
And my view is, and I don't have any firsthand knowledge of what I'm about to tell you, but I do understand a lot about U.S. intelligence, and I would regard it as a given that almost every government does this shit.
Yeah.
You know, and so it would be remarkably naive to assume it's not happening. You know?
Yeah, I hear you. Well, especially when, you know, I had Henry Vinson on the show. He was the guy who ran the funeral parlor credit card machine that this call boy operation was running through. And he tells me he went to this apartment with Lawrence King and Craig Spence. Craig Spence comes in with Secret Service bodyguards, and they open up this closet door, and there's all this recording equipment all over the blackmail, all over the place, man. You know? So there's all high level stuff, man.
Yeah. Gosh.
Now, in our second hour, which is coming up, we're going to do a part 2 with Mr. Walt. You're listening to William Hamilton, who is the man behind the Inslaw.com software, the Promis software, the man inside with the Danny Casolaro, Michael Riconosciuto. You hear these names, Octopus. You hear this stuff all the time. This is the guy. He's never done an interview before. That's how important this is. Now, we have about 2 minutes left before, and then we're going to reboot and get back together again. But what do you want to leave us with in this hour? And just think, when we come back, we're going to talk about Danny Casolaro, all the suspicious deaths around this whole thing. What would you like to leave us with in this hour, though?
Well, I have never believed Danny Casolaro committed suicide, and thought that made no sense. And I had sources, Ed,
yeah,
one day, a retired Army Criminal Investigations Division guy approached me when I was about to testify on the Hill and said he wanted to provide some help. And he turned out to be a gutsy character. And he provided information to me from sources in the U.S. Special Forces intelligence. And they do a lot of the dirty work, evidently, for the CIA on this stuff. And including when you need more blackmail stuff and you have to do some physical surveillance, they do it. And they started furnishing information first through the retired Army Criminal Investigations Division officer, and then directly to me. And at one point, the source had to break it off, said he had been warned. Mm-hmm. It would not be good for my health to continue to hear this stuff, you know?
I know.
And anyway, it's a pretty sordid story.
Real quick, before we have to end this, David Korn made a comment that, Danny Castellaro was over his head. Just really quickly, in 1 minute, what do you think of that statement?
I don't think it's true.
Okay.
I thought, anybody would be over their head doing this kind of thing, but he was a pretty smart guy and did not embellish.
Gotcha.
I never saw anything like that, and he had more courage than he should have had, probably.
I can relate to that too. And David Korn also too made a comment about one of my cases where he was just way off base. We're speaking to William Hamilton. We're going to come back with a part 2, maybe a part 3. He can come back anytime he wants. This is golden information that we have to get down on record here in audio for history. William Hamilton, thank you so much. We're talking about the Inslaw.com software, the Promis software, the Octopus, Danny Castellaro, and all of these backdoors. It reaches into a lot of stuff. Iran-Contra it gets into, Adnan Khashoggi. There's a ton of information here we're going to be bringing you guys in the following report with William Hamilton. William Hamilton, thank you so much. I'm going to hang up on you and call you right back in about 5-10 minutes, okay?
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.